Welcome to Module 3 of Public Finance. So this module is entitled Public Goods. And in this module, we will be able to define public goods and discuss their characteristics, explain the difference between pure public goods and pure private goods, and derive the demand curve for a pure public good and explain how it differs from the demand curve for a pure private good. So let's discuss first what is public goods. Public goods refers to a commodity or service that is made available to all members of a society. Typically, these services are administered by government and paid for collectively through taxation. Government provision of public goods implies that the goods are freely available to all rather than being sold in markets. The costs of making the good available are usually financed by taxes. So these public goods are non-rival in consumption, meaning that a given quantity of a public good can be enjoyed by more than one consumer without decreasing the amounts enjoyed by rival consumers. So goods that are rival in consumption are called private goods. Yan. So let's discuss pure public goods and pure private goods. A pure public goods is non-rival. It's a non-rival in consumption for an entire population of consumers, and its benefits have the characteristic of non-exclusion. So a given quantity of a pure public good is consumed by all members of a community as soon as it is produced for or by any one member. While pure private goods is one that, after producers receive compensation for the full opportunity cost of production, it provides benefits only to one person who acquires the good and not to everyone else, not to anyone else. A pure private good is rival in consumption, and its benefits are easily excluded from those who choose not to pay its market price. So pure public bads, meron ding pure public bads, and it also exists. These activities result in external costs affecting a wide range of the population. The quantities of public bads are of concern to all individuals. Air pollution, for example, is a pure public bad if pollutants diffuse in the atmosphere, thereby affecting all individuals independent of the location of their residence. So at the other extreme, national defense can be considered a pure public good. So let's discuss congestible public goods and private goods with externalities. Government supply through political institutions and private supply through markets are alternative means of making any good available. These two alternatives can be evaluated according to the extent to which externalities are associated with either the production or consumption of the good, and the extent to which it is possible to develop a means of selling rights to use the good or service. So let's discuss congestible public goods. These are goods for which crowding or congestion reduces the benefits to existing consumers when more consumers are accommodated. So the marginal cost of accommodating an additional consumer is not zero after the point of congestion is reached. So the price excludable public goods are those with benefits that can be priced. Private clubs are often set up to share facilities such as tennis courts, swimming pools, and dining areas for small groups. So this is the summary of the different characteristics of the goods. So pure private good, price excludable public goods, congestible public goods, and pure public goods. We can check what is the means of the production, what is the method of distribution, and the different examples of private and public. So let's discuss the demand for a pure public good. So the demand for a pure public good must be interpreted differently from the demand for a pure private good. So the market demand curve for a pure private good gives the sum of the quantities demanded by all consumers at each possible price per unit of the good. For example, the market demand curve for a pure private good such as bread is illustrated here. So for any given price, a point on the market demand curve for a pure private good is found by simply adding the quantity that each individual would purchase at that price. The individual demand curves are added laterally over the horizontal axis to obtain the market demand curve. So here in the figure, there are only three consumers of the private good. So at a price of $3 per loaf, the person whose demand curve is DA purchases one loaf per week. So that is the quantity for which the price equals his marginal benefit per week. Yun yung MBA is equal to $3. So the person whose demand curve is presented by DB purchases 2 loaves per week at a price of $3 per loaf. So at that amount of weekly purchase of bread, MB um, is equal to $3. Finally, the person with demand curve DC purchases 3 loaves per week at a price of $3 per loaf because MBC is equal to $3 at that amount of weekly consumption. So the total market quantity demanded by these three consumers is 6 loaves per week at a price of $3 per loaf. This is represented by point E on the market demand curve. Until the price falls below $4 per loaf, the only individual purchasing the good will be the one whose demand curve is represented by DC. At lower prices, the other individuals whose demands are represented by DB and DA progressively enter the market, and the quantities that they demand as prices are lowered are added to the consumer whose demand is DC. So the market demand curve for the private good is labeled like this. Ito. Kung nakikita nyo to, ito. Yan. Another example is the demand for a pure public good. So this shows the person's demand curve for security guards. A point on any of the individual demand curves represents the maximum amount that the consumer would pay to get each unit of the corresponding quantity of the public good. So this maximum amount is the marginal benefit of security protection at each quantity. Each individual's demand curve shows how the marginal benefit of security guards declines as more are made available. The total amount that would be given up per security guard hired per week is the sum of the annual weekly marginal benefits of each of the three consumers. Points on the aggregate demand curve for a public good could be obtained by adding each person's marginal benefit at each possible quantity. The demand curve for a pure public good is obtained by summing the individual demand curves vertically. So the marginal benefit or demand price that each person would pay per unit of the public good is summed at each quantity of the good because all people must consume the same quantity. So for example, the person with the demand curve DA would pay a maximum of $300 per security guard if only one guard were provided per week. Similarly, the maximum amounts the people with demand curves DB and DC would give up per security guard if only one were provided per week would be $250 and $200 respectively. So a point on the market demand curve therefore is obtained by adding these maximum amounts. So because the maximum amounts reflect the marginal benefit of security protection, the point on the market demand curve represented by point Z1 corresponds to the sum of the marginal benefits of all three consumers. This equals $750 per year when only one security guard is provided. The maximum amount per guard that each of the three consumers would give up when two guards are made available per week is $250 for A, $200 for B, and $150 for C. Therefore, the sum of the marginal benefits when two security guards per week are provided is $600 as represented by point C2 in this figure. So adding the marginal benefit received by each consumer from any number of security guards in this way gives points on the demand curve for the pure public good. So this curve is labeled, ito, makikita mo yung below C4. Yan. So, yan lang yung discussion for public goods. And if you have any questions, feel free to um, post it in our MS Teams or in our GC. Thank you.